Hello, my name's Les Back and I'm here with Alison Urie, the director of Vox Liminis. Alison, we're going to be listening to some of your high points and choices from the 12 years that you've spent as director, and also taking stock a little bit and thinking about the future.
We walked the tightrope, watching over the land.
I'd like to start by just asking you how you describe Vox to someone who'd never heard of the organisation.
That's a hard question, Liz. I think Vox is experimental, inspiring, creative, people-driven, energising, stretching and hard, and full of learning.
Mm-hmm. I remember the first time I encountered the organisation and was really taken by the people that are in the room, the range of people who are in the room. And the thing that I was inspired by initially was that you could tell, coming to the East End of Glasgow where your offices are, people were coming from very different points. But could you just tell us about the people that are in the room at any Vox event?
Vox is full of such a brilliantly diverse set of people who all bring such different perspectives and energy and life experience. And at a Vox event in our base in the East End of Glasgow, there might be people who have served a prison sentence and come home again. There might be people who are on a community sentence under the supervision of social workers. There might be people who work in the criminal justice system. There could be a social worker there who is part of the criminal justice system supervising people. There could be somebody who studies crime and punishment. There could be a musician or three. Yeah, just a very diverse set of people. It could be someone who has had a family member in prison. There could be somebody who's been a victim of crime. And often people wear multiple of these hats. They're not just there for one of those reasons, but very diverse and full of energy for it.
I think the thing which everyone shares when they're in that room is they're doing things together. They're making things. They might be writing a song. I just wondered what your reflections are of what it's taken to create an environment like that where people are doing things together.
Yeah, it's taken a lot of generosity on behalf of everyone in the room. Everyone probably a little bit out of their comfort zone and able to stretch themselves by being alongside and making with each other. It takes a lot from everybody. It also takes quite a lot of behind the scenes facilitation to make that, like prior to it, make it safe enough for everyone to come so that people who really need to know what to expect know enough what to expect that they come through the door. You know, the kind of places that we run workshops could be in a community setting, but it could also be in a prison setting where very diverse people might make together, make songs together, might make films together. You know, different settings require have different barriers to cross.
But it's so interesting that, to me anyway, and partly it was enchanting to me to get the first time that I encountered this, was the work that it takes to do that. Because very often people are coming together already with labels being attached to them, fighting against that oftentimes, and not having a language to know how to recompose and what it would mean to connect.
Yeah.
Connecting isn't straightforward, is it?
No, it's not. It's absolutely not. And it requires a lot of everybody in the room to do that. My friend, poet Padraig Otuma, he talks about the root of facilitation being the French word facile, which means to make easy. And the hard work of making easy, I think, is something that everybody in the room is part of. It requires a lot of absolutely everybody in the room. Yeah.
And sometimes it's very basic things, or seemingly basic things, to make people feel at ease. Breaking bread, having a meal together, conversation. But, you know, one of the things that really always strikes me is that newcomers coming into that space, oftentimes there may be apprehension, there may be ill-ease, and the part of the magic of the process is the small gestures that put people at ease. And one of the things that always struck me coming to board meetings was that you'd often introduce the meeting by having a Vox Tale, which would be an illustration of that work in action. And I wondered, are there ones that you think of when you're trying to describe what Vox does?
Yeah, there are many. And I think it's maybe more about what Vox is, perhaps, and some of the qualities that allow for some of the magic to happen, because it's not really magic. There's a lot of craft and skill from everyone involved in making that possible.
Alison, could you just tell us Vox's origin story?
Sure. So before Vox Liminis was ever conceived of, I had been a youth worker in Dundee for a number of years, working with young people who were on the edges of the criminal justice system often, but I had never given one thought as to how prisons worked or what the criminal justice system really was in our society. And after leaving Hot Chocolate Trust, which is where I was doing youth work, I did a number of small jobs, one of which took me into Court and Vale prison to work with young women who were in prison at that point in time. They were all under 21. And myself and a couple of colleagues created a choir with these young women. And going in and out of that prison every week, I was really quite shocked at what I saw at the time. It was a long number of years ago, and I haven't seen such poor practice since. But at the time, I was really shocked with some of the ways that the young people were being treated while in the prison by prison staff, and kind of lit a bit of a fire in my belly about how come these young people, who are no different from the young people I had been working with in Dundee, but for getting caught one instance or a very poor decision in another, but they were experiencing a system that was, to my mind at the time, quite cruel. And it raised a lot of questions in my mind. At the same time, I found myself on the board of a small charity in Maryhill, and one of the other trustees on that was Fergus McNeill. And I realised that Fergus, in his day job, studied crime and punishment and how people move on from it. So I started asking him, what is this justice thing all about? What? It feels more like injustice than what I'm seeing. So between us, we started kicking about ideas of how could we find ways that people can connect and think differently about how we deal with crime and punishment in Scotland and beyond. And from that, the practices and ideas of Vox Liminis were born. And so after discussions over a number of months, I then found some people in IRIS, the Institute for Research and Innovation in Social Services in Scotland, who were willing to take a punt on this person who was determined to create something from scratch, and they were able to find £5,000 to let us get going. And with that insecure amount of security, I jacked in my job and started up Vox Liminis a few months later. And from there, we've kind of experimented with what could it look like for art to play a role in how we think about crime and punishment, beyond being something that's just education for an individual, or beyond being just about supporting change for someone who is in prison or trying to move on from crime or the experience of crime. And what could it look like to try and see what kind of change could be possible at lots of different levels? And we actually started out by designing projects that would always work to try and achieve change on more than one level. So if you think about individual change, family change, community change, local community change, institutional change, and then public attitude change, we tried and continue to have tried over all the years in Vox to design projects that work towards positive change at more than one of these levels at a time.
Could you just break that down to us, so what that means in terms of the things that you did at those different levels?
Rather than just going into prison to work with prisoners, we would go into prison and work with prisoners and prison staff or people from the local community to write songs together and explore something that is of interest or pertinence to all of the people in the room creatively. And rather than just work with children who have a parent in prison when they go to a family visit, to work with multiple families together in a group of families, say, trying to affect change in some sort of way for the children and the partner of the person inside or the grandparent of the kids who's brought them to the visit, and the person who is incarcerated at the time, forming friendships and allegiances and being seen as a parent.
So you're working at that level of the most affected in terms of families and also those people who have been inside prison and coming out of prison too. But then you're also trying to intervene in the public conversation too. And I wonder if I could ask you a little bit about that.
Yeah, we have tried to make work that asks questions of the general public and asks questions of those who practice in criminal justice services and those who manage and make policy that affects criminal justice services and processes. Yeah, we want to make work that asks questions and pushes imagination of what might be possible.
What questions do you think are important to ask in this way?
I think there's almost some very basic questions that need asked. We've found opportunities to get people to look fresh at what happens just now, what the status quo is, how that affects everyone involved, and ask questions that just push a bit beyond that into what could be. You know, what could it look like if this worked in a way that everyone was able to emerge out the other side of it a bit more full, a bit more connected, a bit more creative, a bit more able to contribute in society. We've asked people to look at the status quo and question it as to why.
Why do we put people in prison and think putting them away is a solution? And what does that create? I mean, those are the kinds of questions that it feels like Vox has been centrally trying to address.
We've spent a lot of time focusing on what it means to leave after prison and just how difficult that is to reintegrate and or integrate in some instances for the first time into society after an experience that can often be very alienating and institutionalising in some cases. Oftentimes people come out with far less resource to be a contributing member of society than they went into prison with. And oftentimes people's mental health has been really damaged in the process. And the experience of prison is often very, very hard on family members, partners, children. And we've been asking questions about how people experience that, how that affects all of their life. You know, how does it feel if you're a young person whose parent has been in the news and has been served a prison sentence and your family business has been all over the press and you still have to walk into school? What does that do? What sort of stigma is that to hold? What does it do to your identity? And how do people treat you differently for it? And so we've done a lot of work asking those kinds of questions as well about the effect that this has on everybody. We've also worked with people who've been victims of crime, exploring how they have found the processes of justice and how at times the processes that they've been through have been themselves quite damaging. And just recognising that it feels like it doesn't work well for anybody.
It's really so interesting listening to you talk about it, Alison. I wanted to ask you a little about the way that music and songs particularly can be a connecting point or a bridging point. And I wondered if you'd thought about that, not just the making of music which brings people together, but also the way in which songs can move.
Yeah, sometimes people write songs that are very personal to them and they've got a clear idea of where they want that song to go. It could be to communicate to a loved one or communicate to the world that they've moved on and they've changed. Oftentimes, though, people write songs that just are what they are interested in or find they get life from and want to share. And there's something so brilliant about the kind of connections that are found when the songs sort of seep out into the world and are heard and understood differently by the hearers. There's something in the power of connecting with something and then realising you might have more in common with the person who wrote it than you thought you might have when you understand that person who wrote it was in prison or had a very different life experience to you. It's finding these connections.
Alison, we've asked you to choose some examples from the work that's been made, and I wonder if we could just ask you to introduce your first one.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. The first song that we're going to listen to is Pixelated Pictures. It's a song that was written a number of years back by a group of women in Corton Vale, working with Andrew Howie and Joe Mango. The song still resonates with me because of, you'll hear it in a second, but partly it also resonates with me because one of the young people who I'd seen in Corton Vale all those years back that had inspired the fire in my belly to make Vox was part of this group and partly inspired the song. So the group themselves who wrote the song have written a short introduction to it, and I'd like to read that.
Fantastic.
This song was written by a collective group of prisoners about saying goodbye to someone they've got to know while in prison. It asks a person leaving to remind them what it's like outside and to tell them of the things they can look forward to. But the other says that they won't forget how it feels to be trapped in prison. The song and title, Pixelated Pictures, was also inspired by one of the participants explaining how each time she leaves the prison in a G4S van for orthodontist appointments, she looks through the window and takes in all the things people are doing in everyday life so she can remember to look forward to them. However, in between these appointments, it can be easy to forget these memories.
Oh, brilliant.
Farewell, my co-pilot. Tell me what it's like outside. I've forgotten how it feels to be at home, my friend. Farewell, my co-pilot. I'll remember what it's like inside. My heart is heavy. Lock the door. Open your mind, my friend. Press pause on this repeating scene. Help me remember how to dream those pixelated pictures I have seen in my imagination. In my imagination. So long, my co-pilot. Drift away into the blue, flying solo and so nice. Long lonely nights, now without you, my friend. Press pause on this repeating scene. Help me remember how to dream those pixelated pictures I have seen in my imagination. In my imagination. Press pause on this repeating scene. Help me remember how to dream those pixelated pictures I have seen in my imagination. In my imagination. In my imagination. In my imagination. Farewell, my co-pilot. Tell me what it's like outside. I've forgotten how it feels to be at home, my friend.
We've been listening to Pixelated Pictures with Alison Urie. Alison, I wonder what it's like to listen to that song now with the passage of time.
Yeah. There's something wistful about that song that I just love. Like it does connect me to the people and the encounters that got me started into what became Vox Liminis. And I do love that chorus. Help me remember how to dream. The pixelated pictures I've seen in my imagination is I quite regularly go back to that song just looking for my own inspiration to keep going and keep imagining afresh and anew.
I think your next example, Alison, is about another prison project with people coming together. I wonder if you could just introduce it for us.
Yeah, this song came out of a piece of work that we did in Inverness prison a number of years ago. And the work in Inverness prison I found fascinating. I think it was some of our best work in prison. And I think that was because there was a lot of excellent work already happening in the prison. And one of the projects that they were doing well before our time was around bringing people together who had experience of recovery from addictions, and they were running sessions in the prison where they brought together people from the local community who were in recovery with people who were at that point in the prison. And so they were making this kind of inside-outside community in the prison. And then that meant when people left the prison, they would move quite easily into relationships and community that existed outside the prison walls and a supportive environment for their onward life. And that work was just excellent. And they invited us to come alongside that. And I think we were able to add to that with different skills by bringing people together in the prison to write songs that drew from people's life experiences, sometimes around theme of recovery, sometimes around other themes. And they brought together prisoners, people from the local community, and people who were working in the prison. And together we formed these little temporary communities that were really very strong and definitely grew out of the brilliant community work that was happening there in the prison already. One of the songs that came out of that was written by somebody who was on the outside of the prison at the time and quite new in his recovery journey. And he came in with just a ton of enthusiasm and energy to the prison project and gave a lot to that. The song's called Fuck It Button. I would like to introduce it by using the words of the writers.
What a title.
Yeah. So Fuck It Button was written by Gus Bear and Donna Matrocha. And they say of it, or Gus says of this, I wrote this song to myself when I was 3 months clean into a rehab programme for the moments where I feel really close to just pressing the fuck it button and starting to use again. It's a reminder of some of my lowest points and all the people I've known and lost to alcohol and drugs. I spent most of my life wearing a mask and pretending to be someone else, but now I feel I'm learning to take the mask off and be the real me.
I know you want to press the fuck it button to oblivion and beyond, but you never reach the bottom of freedom from want. I know you want to press the fuck it button to oblivion and beyond, but you never reach the bottom of freedom from want. Things are never that bad to revive the past or put on another mask. Things are never that bad. lucky, 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 lucky. Head on a spin cycle, life's a bottle, sleeps under the pillow, jumps to the toilet, one-way glass, they can see in but you can't see out, always watching, people flipping, doors slamming, no hurt, no cry, no emotion, knowing it's wrong but right the compulsion, no matter how strong, knowing what it did, would I right the wrong, would I roll the dice twice, twice, have you ever broken the bone of something, have you ever broken the bone of something, start kind of screaming. I know you want to press the fucking button to oblivion and beyond, but you'll never reach the bottom of freedom and on. I know you want to press the fucking button to oblivion and beyond, but you'll never reach the bottom of freedom and on. I know you want to press the fucking button to oblivion and beyond, but you'll never reach the bottom of freedom and on. I know you want to press the fucking button.
Fantastic. I think, Alison, we all have moments when we're tempted to press the fuck it button.
Yep.
But one of the things about that song, and also the introduction as you read it, the reference to masks, I suppose all social life is about taking on and taking off masks, or trying to choose different ones. But that seems something that the people that you've worked with have had to struggle with. And I just wondered if you had any reflections on that. The choice of the metaphor of the mask.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really powerful and connects with so many people. I think whether that, as was in that song, somebody wanting to not put back on the masks, be more truly them, or whether that's people trying on new identities to try and move forward. Maybe it is that, you've been in a situation where you've had to put on masks to survive and you want to sort of try different identities a bit to move forward. And I think there's something about both writing songs and sharing some of your story that lets you put a different side of yourself across. But there's also something about the performance of a song that means that you can choose how you're seen. If you've taken on the identity of a songwriter or taken on the identity of an artist or a singer, it can be really freeing if your identity has been previously connected with things that you want to move on and away from.
Yeah, so taking on that mask and taking on the mask and the mantle of being a songwriter, being a different character in your song can be exactly that. Is that something that happens a lot, do you think, in the process of making this kind of music?
I think it happens a lot. I also think it's something that the criminal justice system kind of insists on. You can't get away from the fact that an instance of a crime is reduced to labels of offender and victim and witness. Everyone's sort of identities are kind of flattened at that point, and the whole process that then kicks in means that it's very hard to be seen in your fullness. And I think that oftentimes people who are subject to a prison sentence find it really necessary to wear masks to survive, whether that's just keeping your head down or keeping your emotions under check or behaving in a certain way to fit in. It's also about how you might survive a system where you're under scrutiny at all times in prison, and sometimes for those under supervision after prison. And that scrutiny of who you are and what you do at all times can lead to people feeling like they have to live in an act.
And that isn't a matter of choice in that situation, isn't it, at all? It's something that is imposed.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose in many ways the opportunity or the invitation to be otherwise is a very powerful one. If you feel like it's been decided who you are by it's either the things that you've done or the experiences that you've had.
Yeah, I think so. And it can be, the opportunities that we provide for people can be helpful or unhelpful. I remember actually the very first Vox project that we led was a choir in Berlin. And for some of the prisoners involved, they were loving the fact that they were going to perform and take on a different role within the prison and got really into it. But the story and the person that sticks with me 12 years later was the guy who had been there every week, loved it, and took me aside on the second last week and said, look, I won't be there next week and it's nothing to do with you. I've loved this, I've really enjoyed it, but I'm not going to be a performing monkey in this place. And that was a real important lesson to learn, the kind of subtle and complex role that we can play in disrupting what's going on within the prison might be useful, might not be useful, depending who you are and where you sit within that system. Mm-hmm. And it was a kind of cautionary tale about how do we bring art in new ways into these places and not do damage?
Reflecting on it now, what do you think is the lasting lesson within that story?
I think it's just that everything that we do is complex. It can look really good on the surface and can also be really damaging. I mean, that guy had his own confidence and critical thinking to say, no, this isn't for me. But there's a lot of people involved in our work that don't have that agency or confidence to speak out. And it was a salutary lesson for me in terms of what are the ethics of what we're doing here.
The complexity and the openness of being brave enough to say, I'm not sure exactly where this falls in terms of how much are we allowing people to be a version of themselves that they want to decide. Mm-hmm. Alison, tell us about your next song.
The next song that I'd like us to listen to is Life Under Observation. It was written quite recently in Unbound. Unbound's the community of people who meet and do life together in one way or another in an ongoing way in Vox Liminis. So that's the diversity of all the people that I've discussed being part of Vox. And we meet together for dinner, we write songs together, we form friendships and do community together. And Life Under Observation was written by Tam, Peter, Chris, Lisa and Louise, a number of whom have experience of coming home from prison and then being under the supervision of a social worker to, assess risk in an ongoing way as they've transitioned on from prison. And for some of that group, they found that scrutiny quite hard to live with and very hard to forge their new identities and new ways forward in life while that is sitting over them. And I think the song says that better than I can, but one of the writers wrote this: Life Under Observation is more than just a song, it's a call to action. It urges us to reconsider how we view and treat those who are trying to make a fresh start. It's about acknowledging the hidden struggles and offering a more compassionate path forward.
On a one-way road, you don't need to be boxed in. Hands out holding on. Hands out holding on. On a one-way road, you don't need to be boxed in. Hands out holding on. Hands out holding on. Take a closer look. Are you crashing back to life? With your magnified eyes, you're on your own. Life under observation. How far do I have to fall? Do you learn to play the game? Hands out holding on, hands out breathing in. A loss of balance, this too will come to pass. Hands out holding on, hands out breathing in. So take a closer look. Are you crashing back to life? With your magnified eyes, you're on your own. Life under observation. How far do I have to fall? Do you learn to play the game or build your walls? Call you when I can. Stuck in the middle of nowhere. Call you when I can. To get you nowhere to get there. Call you when I can. Stuck in the middle of nowhere. Call you when I can. To let you know where to get there. Take a closer look. Are you crashing back to life? With your magnified eyes, you're on your own. Life under observation. How far do I have to fall? Do you learn to play the game or build your walls? Do you learn to play the game or build your walls?
Life under observation. Alison, I wonder if we talked a little bit about masks, but listening to that song, it made me think about stories and how people are either expected to tell the story of their rehabilitation or atonement, and also the stories that people want to tell. And I wondered if you had any reflections on that, listening to these songs and the kind of work that people make.
Mm-hmm.
How free are people to tell the story they want to tell it?
Yeah, I think it's pretty complicated for everybody. Even in that song, you know, there's a sort of degree of trying to challenge and push at how people are being seen, and at the same time a kind of acceptance of what the situation requires of them to live under observation. It's always a bit of both, and I think people often want to tell the story. We all want to tell the story of like how we're moving on and good, and you know, might have made mistakes, might have, you know, been in places that we didn't want to be, but we form stories to make sense of that for ourselves, and we form stories to make sense of that in the way that we communicate it to other people. And the truth of that is always pretty complicated. There's pressures on what is acceptable to say, and also pressures on what you need to say to be able to access services or access ways back into the bits of society you want to be part of. So these stories are necessary to think through and, you know, decide how you want to shape yours, you know.
Yeah. The complexity of it reveals how much stories are written into the criminal justice system sometimes, and the expected ones, but also, you know, I think what's often very inspiring listening to those songs, the reaching for another kind of story. Vox has been involved in making a lot of music, but it's not the only thing that Vox has been involved in. And I just wondered if you had other examples. I know not necessarily musical ones.
Yeah, there's a couple of non-musical projects that I'd love to share with you. The first one is a project that resulted in a book of poetry called A Casual Kindness, This project's actually part of the larger Distant Voices project, which was a multi-year collaboration with academic partners. And a couple of the songs actually that we've heard in the podcast already came out of Distant Voices project. So A Casual Kindness came out of a poetry project led by Pádraig Ó Tuama, an Irish poet. And Pádraig worked artistically with myself to bring together a very diverse set of people to consider the complexities of coming home after punishment for those coming home after punishment, after prison perhaps, and also how they might be experienced by those that might receive them back after that time, you know, families receiving somebody back into the home, or people who've been a victim of a crime knowing that the person who perpetrated the crime they'd experienced was coming home, and all of the kind of complex feelings that everyone has in that time of transition. And we did this by going away together, a very diverse group of people with different experience to share. Went away for a weekend where we cooked together and took part in all sorts of workshops facilitated by Pádraig. And we didn't write our own poems, we all contributed responses to prompts. And Pádraig then took that work that was all by everybody that was part of it and wove that into a series of poems, which became a collection, that some of which are published in the book A Casual Kindness. And we then went on an editing journey together. So Pádraig wove the words that we had created together into poems and brought that back to the group of us who'd all participated in the process. And I think 3 times over, we sat down with the words that he had written into poems, read them to each other, questioned them, changed them, edited them, and also told stories that resonated in the hearing of the poems that then resulted in new poems that came out of it. And that kind of iterative, slow editing collective process of coming back to the work again and again resulted in something that I think that we all feel collective ownership of, while none of us can say, well, I wrote that poem. And that process felt really good. We then recorded some of these poems, which I'll share a few of in a minute. And then we've allowed these poems to enter into the world in different ways. So they've been published as a book of poetry, A Casual Kindness. They've also been taken up by the Scottish Prison Service on their leadership training programme and are being used in that leadership training programme to encourage reflection with the prison staff that are on leadership programmes. It's also, some of the poems have been then included in a social work textbook that is used to train social workers. And yeah, just that ability to make work that finds its way out into audiences who maybe can change how some of this is done feels exciting and powerful, and also a bit of an unknown.
Yeah, let's hear one.
Licence. Damned if I say no, and damned if I try to make a go of it on my licence. My girlfriend had a baby, hers and mine, and I'm struggling to get a job that I can keep. I'm on a waiting list, 12 or 100, anything at all. One phones me up and says there's work if I have a licence, but I've got another kind of licence, if you follow, and I'm mandated to some dates with a social worker. I'm prohibited from being in certain places. I come with complications to the job. I'm still waiting. I'm a young man with an old man's pride. I'd like to work, to provide, to put food on the table. But I'm not able. There's a stinking lie in licence. There's a chain around me. I said to her, I'll watch the wee man, but I can't even buy a nappy because all the shops stop alcohol along with bread and cheese and nappies. Have a licence to sell tenants? I can't go. Aldi, Spar, even fucking Tesco's. All of them as dangerous to me as the bar just down the road. Don't get me wrong, I don't want samples of anything much stronger than a proper cup of tea. I go to meetings once a week, more if I need more. But I wish my higher power would sort out my parole and the licence that controls my poor parenting. I'm stuck at home, watching her go out to work and out to shop, and worrying some cop will stop me on the street and inquire about the company I've been keeping. I'm barely keeping up. I go to meetings and then come home, making every effort at keeping my conditions, not breaking them. I'm permitted half an opportunity and asked to make it double what it cannot be. I committed crimes, I know, and I know this as well. Licensing is hell if you're hoping to make good.
The next two poems that we're going to hear were both recorded by someone who came along to Unbound only for a couple of times, but wanted to take part in voicing the words in these poems and does it so brilliantly. I'm keen that everyone hears them. So this is from different perspectives on the coming home experience.
Letter from a Victim, 5. Dear, I heard you're out on licence and now I'm nervous going out. Once I thought I saw you on the road and I shouted. God, I shouted. But it was just the neighbour's boy grown tall. If you ever see me, stay away. I know all the things I need to know. It was a one-off crime. You served your time with good behaviour. I care and I don't care. I've moved. But still, I worry that I'll see you. Stay away. As you left them, things might not be where you left them, and Linda doesn't work at the co-op anymore. You might be surprised by who has stuck around. Everyone has a phone now, even the kids. Peter doesn't work at the co-op anymore. He had no support. Everyone has a phone now. Even the kids know which boxes to tick and when. There's not enough support, and so-called social media isn't very social. Remember, there'll always be that box to tick. Use your phone. Everything's all online now. Social media isn't very social, and you'll be surprised by who hasn't stuck around. Everything's online now. Check your email, your phone. Things might not be as you left them.
Incredibly powerful. I want to just ask you a little bit about the poetry alongside the music. Do you think that the poetry offered something else, or different? Was it just a different medium to do the same kind of work?
I mean, I think any art form lets people engage with it in slightly different ways, and different people take up voice and space in the room depending on what they're most comfortable with, but also people find connections and resonances in different ways depending on how we're working together. Poetry is maybe easier for words to be woven together into a kind of collective piece, perhaps lending itself even more to collective work is theatre, and immersive theatre is an art form that we've worked in a little bit and made some really excellent projects. I'd like to tell you a little bit about one of them.
Yeah, please, tell us about that.
So Kin, which was an arts collective of young people aged 15 to 25, came together all with experience of having a close family member, so a parent or a sibling who were in prison, and came together with the collective energy to try and change how they had experienced that as a family member of their loved one. So working on trying to change the stigma that they faced at school, or the negative effect it had in their social relationships as a teenager. And so they came together with a real clear vision of trying to make change in the world. And a piece that they worked on that I think is just absolutely brilliant is called Limbo. It is a piece of immersive theatre where, working with an artist called Tom Scullion and Rosie Reed, they together developed this piece called Limbo, which was based on a waiting room. So all the people coming to this workshop or performance waited outside a room in a corridor, and then were invited in to a room set up as a sort of stark waiting room, chairs round the sides and everyone kind of looking at each other and not sure what to do. And there's a receptionist sitting at the side of the room but not saying anything. So the whole place was set up like a doctor's waiting room or something that everyone's kind of familiar with, but no one knows quite what to do in a waiting room, right? And then there was no instructions. You're just left as a group, sitting there, waiting for something to happen, but nothing happens. And each time this was performed, the group would eventually get to a point of somebody taking up a mission to revolt or at least find out what's going on. And so, first off, someone might go to the receptionist and say, look, what's happening here? What is this? At which point the receptionist would hand out a questionnaire for everyone to fill in while they're waiting. This questionnaire was then full of sort of circular questions where everyone would then get very frustrated at the questionnaire. And if you went back and asked the receptionist about the questionnaire, they were not at all helpful. And then you would sit back down. And then at some point, somebody in the group might start getting a bit raucous and the group might collectivise into some sort of action about why they were being kept in this room together. And that feeling, that sort of visceral feeling of, I'm in a place, I don't understand it, no one's told me the rules, I don't know how to get out of it, I can't find enough information, it's all oblique and confusing, that sort of real visceral feeling sticks with me. And we took it into schools and ran it with school classes, as well as running it with members of the public. And each time it then resulted in amazing conversations. That Rosie and Tom then facilitated conversations with those who'd experienced it around how young people felt the experience of having a family member in prison was to them. But rather than tell people that's what they felt, they'd created a way for everyone to experience it and feel it for themselves, albeit in a minute way. Mm-hmm. And I think there's something so powerful in creating that experience.
Because it's so mysterious, that the way that waiting really makes us think about who has the power to decide, those who won't wait and those who are kept waiting. And it's so revealing, that, and then resonant in so many different contexts. Visiting someone in prison, passing through the waiting room, it's such a reminder of that. It sounds like that was a brilliant way to make those things that are often mysterious and tacit explicit.
Yeah, and to be able to share that in a way that other people felt a little bit of it, so powerful.
So we're talking to Alison Urie, the director of Vox Liminis, and listening to you describe the process behind the making of this work and the people involved. It is really a truly inspiring thing. I wonder if I could just ask you to say something about the last couple of examples. I think we're going to hear some more music. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. I was keen to share some stories from a couple of projects that happened during lockdown, COVID-19 lockdowns, which for us was really hard.
How in the world did you manage to keep Vox alive through that?
Yeah, it was really tough, particularly singing. It's not normally a high-risk pursuit, but it became a very high-risk pursuit. And doing any kind of work within institutions like prison became impossible for a longer time than almost anything else in society. And so we were really hampered in doing anything like our normal work for a long period of time. And I think the challenges of lockdown brought the best and worst out in us as well. We, as Unbound community, we tried to keep communicating online, but that was really tough. And some of the culture war sort of things that were happening in the world at the time also kind of bubbled to the surface in a way that exposed a lot of our differences. We come together as a group of people who are interested in things to do with criminal justice and with a passion and interest in the arts. But that doesn't mean that we come from the same place politically or have similar views on the world. And recognising that actually the period of time had exposed quite a lot of our differences rather than similarities, but we tried to figure out ways of better disagreeing well, rather than coming to any sort of settled position.
That's one of Vox's, I'm not going to say it, it's a maxim, isn't it? How to disagree well.
Yeah, and I don't think we always achieve it, but I think trying to work towards it is something that we've learned is really important. And there's a project that we took part in, facilitated by the visual artist Richie Cumming, called Painted Visual Arguments, which is a process that he had developed elsewhere and then brought to our community during lockdown times. And when we were able to get back together, we spent 2 days over a weekend in Vox Liminis. working with Richie, who had gone and bought all of the newspapers that were available on a Saturday morning. And we spent time that Saturday morning pulling through these newspapers and finding things that we disagreed about. And deliberately, Richie put us into pairings and wee groups who actively disagreed on the topic being discussed. And we sort of, in communicating, tried to find a way to let difference of opinion coexist. And then we moved that process into a visual one. So we then started writing our own headlines that we thought might be contentious, and came up with a very diverse set of headlines, painted them up on big newspaper print, and then started pasting them onto this giant canvas that we'd made out of plywood, and spent the rest of the weekend actively disagreeing with each other by painting over and changing words and images that we all pasted up on this massive board, not to try and come to a settled position, but to recognise our differences and that we could still create together despite them.
Disagreeing well, recognising our differences is I think it's such an important thing in our time, it feels like. But songs kind of bring us together, don't they? And I wanted to ask you about your next choice.
Yeah, the next choice is a song called Electrical Language. And it came out of a project that we did during lockdown, where we tried to actively kind of dig into solidarity in our differences. And we decided to learn a lot from others who had been working online during the times of lockdown, which we really hadn't. But learning from others, we then designed a process where we split into 5 different groups with people in very diverse situations and worked together on the theme of solidarity. And the group that I was in, and there were 6 of us in the group, 1 person was in prison, 4 people were in Glasgow, and 1 person was living overseas. And we had to find a way to communicate. 2 of those people weren't able to access Zoom video calls or WhatsApp messages or anything. Some were able to use email, some were able to use text, some required someone to go and stand at the gate at the end of their garden to have a conversation. The person in prison was communicating by email a prisoner, which is a very complicated thing that involves using technology to communicate, and then it's printed out at the other end, and the person receiving it is able to get a piece of paper and write a written response in reply. And this was all facilitated by the musician Lucy Cathcart-Frodin, who managed to get us all thinking about electricity pylons as a starting point, as these static things in our landscape where communication flies up and down electronically. And with that as an inspiration, we somehow managed to work together to create this song, Electrical Language.
Alive but motionless, I watch cars and lorries rush to their destinations. And when the traffic slows, I catch snippets of conversations. A giant no one sees, conducting sounds no one can hear. Lifeless limbs hang in time. The weight of power is all you know of me. We speak in binary. We speak in footsteps and voltage, silence and static. We speak in electrical language. The giant stood on solid ground. The wind and rain came pouring down, and yet he stood. No bending over in the gale, no groan, no creak, no woe to tell. The lonely traveller wandered by, friend the giant said, one day too, you'll stand and point ahead. We speak in binary. We speak in footsteps and voltage, silence and static. We speak in electrical language. You have shown me the road home, but most importantly, I've seen your heart and soul. You've stood proud for years alone, looking for someone to hear your sound. This life is a kaleidoscopic web of connections. Some last a second, some a lifetime.
Alison, we're at a junction point, really. It's the beginning of a new chapter for Vox, and it's at the point where you're handing over the direction of the organisation too. And I just wonder if you could say a little bit about this moment, this sort of pivotal moment, really, in terms of what you think the possibilities are going forward and what you hope for.
Yeah, absolutely. It's exciting and yeah, quite fascinating to sit at this point, not quite sure what will come next. We've been successful in getting Creative Scotland multi-year funding for the next 3 years, which gives us the ability to think creatively and strategically as an organisation in a way that Vox Liminis has really struggled to do so in the last few years. The organisation's got an opportunity to do new things. It's the most amazing opportunity for the organisation and feels to me like the right opportunity to step out and let someone else with new skills and energy and imagination lead it forward into a new phase.
Are there things that you have hunches about what that opportunity contains? Are there elements within it that occur to you just in this moment of transition, really?
I mean, I think we've been kind of experimenting a bit on the kind of interface between collaborative, participatory arts and socially engaged arts. And I think this is an opportunity to really push at what's possible artistically in a collaborative way from the basis of a community or a set of people who are kind of in some way involved in Vox Liminis, and that diversity really shaping and informing ambitious artwork that can affect change in public thinking and questions.
It's a huge gift that you're bequeathing, but I think it is important for us to thank you for that gift, really, and everything that you've made in the course of the last 12 years. But tell us about your last song.
So the final song that I want us to listen to is Rendezvous with Warpaint. It's a song with tons of energy and life, and I just love it. That's why I've chosen it. It was written in a session in Castle Huntly Prison, where we've done lots of amazing work over the years. It was written by Fruzy and Mark Rooney, working together. They say of the song is inspired by the Magnum Leisure Centre in Irvine, I spent most of my childhood there, progressing to teenage years when drinking started and getting up to no good. The Magnum has closed down during my time in prison, and this is the reason I decided to write a song about a typical Friday night going out with my mates, drinking, then heading to the ice disco at the Magnum. Then it'd be back home to try and get some sleep, but unable to do so due to being wrecked. There's just something brilliant about this song that we all resonate with in different ways, whether we've been to the Magnum Centre as a kid or not.
Should've stayed home. I should've just said no. Victoria way. Sorting out a cargo. Me and my three amigos checking to see if there's anyone there. Counterfeit tobacco as well. Blue, blue. Finding our game face, get the bus organised, and settle that glow. Joe got steaming on stage.